They didn't fire me with a phone call. They didn't even offer me the dignity of anger. No raised voices, no slammed doors, no dramatic goodbyes. Just silence. Sterile, suffocating silence. I was standing in the corner of the very boardroom I helped design, glass walls, reclaimed wood, industrial steel, watching two people half my age pretend I didn't just give 17 years of my life to Vantage and Company. Kyle Bennett, the new CSO, read from a script he'd probably practiced in front of his mirror, while Rachel from HR avoided eye contact and clutched her iPad like it might shield her from my reaction. I should have seen it coming. The whispers, the skipped invites, the meetings that mysteriously fell off my calendar. But when you've built something with your own hands, you don't look for cracks. You look for excuses. That was my mistake. Loyalty blinded me. Jack, we're restructuring to align with our future growth strategy, Kyle had said. Future, as if I belonged in the past. This isn't about performance. It's about direction. Translation, I wasn't shiny enough for their Instagram reels. Too experienced to be trendy. Too respected to be manipulated. They didn't say it out loud, but I knew what they meant. My kind, the kind who remembers how this firm started. When we were pitching from cramped apartments and maxed out credit cards, we were no longer assets. We were reminders, and reminders make people uncomfortable. They handed me a sleek envelope with a transition package, and I walked out with my head high. Not because I wasn't broken. I was. But because I knew what they had just done. They hadn't replaced me. They'd amputated the firm's backbone and handed the body to a boy who once asked if ROI was return on Instagram. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just walked past the receptionist, who I'd personally hired, and stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. The world moved on. But I didn't, because what they didn't realize was that I was the damn blueprint. And blueprints don't disappear. They rebuild. This isn't a story about being fired. This is a story about what happens after, when the dust settles, when the silence gets loud, and when the person they tried to erase decides to write the next chapter in ink. Their ink. And this time, I'm not coming back to beg. I'm coming back to own the building. 2 days after my so-called strategic transition, I sat alone in my apartment staring at the skyline, a glass of bourbon sweating in my hand. The city pulsed outside, full of people chasing promotions, pitching ideas, rushing toward relevance. I, on the other hand, had nowhere to be, no meetings to run, no fires to put out, no inbox begging for my attention. The silence wasn't peace. It was insult dressed up as quiet. I tried to sleep. Couldn't. Tried to read. Couldn't focus. So I just stood by the window and watched the lights flicker on in the building I used to run. Floor 17, the strategy floor, still had its lights on. Someone was staying late, pretending they were carrying the torch. But they weren't. They didn't even know where the flame came from. The next morning, still in the same clothes, I brushed my teeth and checked my phone, something I hadn't done in 24 hours. That's when I saw it. A single text message that felt like lightning in my chest. Casey Linwood, CEO of Nova Health Systems. A woman who once told me I saved her brand from collapsing after a disastrous data breach. Her text was short. Tell me this is a joke. Call me. Now. I called. She answered before the first ring finished. Jack, what the hell's going on? I just got an email from Vantage. Some junior account lead I've never met is taking over. What happened? I told her the truth. Short, clean, no bitterness. She was silent. Then she said it. If you're not there, I'm not either. I want you, not the company. It wasn't just her. Over the next few hours, more messages came in. A voicemail from Andre Penn at Radius Telecom. A furious email from Madison Greer at Helix Ventures. A one-line subject from Franklin Monroe, the fashion industry's golden boy. You built my brand. Where did you go? By noon, I had 7 clients asking to move with me. I hadn't even started building anything yet. I didn't even have a plan. But they didn't care. They didn't want a plan. They wanted me. That night, I met with Claire Monroe at a quiet corner bar in Portland. No suits, no fluff. Just 2 professionals sitting across from each other like we were plotting a revolution. Claire was one of those rare leaders who listened without interrupting. She didn't ask me what happened at Vantage. She didn't offer pity. Instead, she ordered whiskey neat and slid a notebook across the table. Tell me what you'd build if nobody was watching, she said. That's when I told her about Signal. Not a company, not a firm, a philosophy, a place where clients weren't data points and employees weren't KPI machines, where messaging meant something, where leadership was earned, not installed. She leaned back, sipping her drink. We've been looking to expand, but not with suits, with builders. Jack, we don't want to hire you. We want to build around you. I blinked. It wasn't a job offer. It was a stake in the ground. I wasn't bouncing back. I was launching forward. Within 10 days, I had an office, a team, and a mission. Signal wasn't announced yet, but whispers travel faster than press releases. Clients followed. Talent reached out. Even people still stuck inside Vantages sent anonymous notes asking if I was building something new. I wasn't just building something. I was building a warning shot. Because the next time I walked into that glass-walled boardroom, I wasn't going to ask for my old seat back. I was bringing the deed to the building. 2 weeks later, I walked into the same building that once tried to erase me. This time, I didn't use my old key card. I didn't need to. I was buzzed in by security, escorted by Claire Monroe herself, managing partner at Straightest Collective, and now the architect of the quiet acquisition that was about to detonate across the glass walls of Vantage & Company. The air felt different the moment I stepped out of the elevator. Not colder, just heavier, like the walls themselves knew something was coming. The staff meeting had been scheduled under the vague heading Strategic Alignment and Organizational Vision. A corporate smokescreen I'd seen too many times. Most of the staff had no idea what was coming. They brought notebooks, anxiety, and a forced sense of optimism. I used to see those faces every day. I knew how they smiled when they were nervous. I knew how they blinked when they were pretending to understand buzzwords. I walked into the boardroom 5 minutes late. On purpose. The room fell silent. Kyle Bennett stood at the head of the table, too crisp, too confident, trying to hide the flicker of confusion crossing his face. He looked like a man holding a deck of cards, unaware someone just switched it out for Uno tiles. Rachel from HR stiffened as if my presence was somehow breaking protocol. Elijah Carr, the founder, was nowhere in sight. Maybe he knew better than to face me. Maybe he was hiding behind plausible deniability, sipping wine in some Sonoma vineyard while the company he once built prepared for a cultural bloodletting. Kyle, I said, calmly setting my leather folder on the table. Let's skip the pleasantries. His jaw tensed. Jack, I wasn't aware. That's clear. I interrupted, scanning the room. Let me save everyone the trouble of reading between lines. The eyes in the room widened. Phones subtly slipped out of pockets. Breath held in collective anticipation. As of this morning, Straightest Collective has acquired a controlling interest in Vantage & Company. A few audible gasps. One woman dropped her pen. Kyle stammered, That's not accurate. We're entering a collaborative. No, I said firmly. You were acquired. Fully. Quietly. And now publicly. Rachel tried to speak, but I turned my gaze to her like a spotlight. I'm leading the integration, I continued. Effective immediately. And let's be clear, this isn't a hostile takeover. It's a cultural correction. The words hung in the air like thunder. Everyone felt it. The shift. The authority. The return of someone they were told had been deleted. Kyle's voice cracked slightly. You can't just walk in here and... I can. And I did. And you, I said, leveling my gaze at him, are relieved of your duties. Effective now. The silence was crushing. Then a single clap. It was Jenna, my former assistant. Then another clap. Then a wave of applause. Hesitant at first, then gaining power. I didn't smile. I didn't soak it in. This wasn't revenge. This was correction. I raised a hand, and the room calmed. I'm not here to reclaim what was taken from me, I said. I'm here to build what should have been protected. This firm didn't lose its clients. It lost its center, its spine, its soul. I shifted. Some teared up. Others sat straighter. We will no longer prioritize algorithms over instincts. Metrics over people. Appearances over integrity. I could see it in their faces, the flicker of something rare. Hope. This isn't about old leadership versus new. This is about meaningful leadership replacing performative management. I turned to Kyle one last time. Please collect your things by end of day. Security will assist you. He didn't argue. He just nodded stiffly and left. I turned back to the team. From today forward, this company isn't just restructured, it's rerouted. No one will be blindsided here the way I was. If you stay to build something real. Not something that looks good on paper, but something that works. People didn't clap this time. They stood, one by one, not in celebration, but in solidarity. That afternoon, I walked the halls of the firm I once helped build, now mine again, not through sentiment but through structure. My name wasn't just whispered in corners. It was said openly, with pride, with gratitude. But I wasn't done, because in a quiet conference room on the top floor, a second meeting was waiting. One-on-one, just me and Elijah Carr. He had returned from wherever legacy founders go when the companies they abandoned are reborn without them. He looked older, thinner, but still tried to mask it with charm. "Jack," he said, rising to greet me. "Quite the return." "No," I replied. "It's a realignment." He smirked, but his eyes didn't follow. "You orchestrated this." "No," I said, sitting across from him. "You did. When you stopped protecting what we built and started protecting your exit strategy." We didn't argue. There was nothing left to fight about. "You can stay," I offered, as a symbolic advisor. Title only. No power. No vote. He flinched. "That's insulting." "It's generous," I replied. "Your name will remain on the wall, but your hands will stay off the wheel." He sat back, quiet for a long moment. Then finally, he nodded. "You're not interested in legacy," he muttered. "You're wrong," I said, standing. "I'm interested in earning it." And with that, I left the room, not as a returning employee, but as the new architect of something that finally had a soul again. By the following Monday, the logo on the front of the building had changed, but the soul of the place was still catching up. You don't rewrite culture overnight. You can't. Culture isn't software. You don't update it with a patch. It's people. It's fear, habit, hesitation, unspoken rules etched into every hallway and every Slack message. But I didn't come back to redecorate. I came back to rewire. The first thing I did was tear down the executive tower. Not literally, but structurally. I moved my desk out of the corner office and into the bullpen next to the design team. The first morning I arrived, heads turned. Conversations paused. A few employees assumed I was lost. "I work here," I told one of the new hires with a grin. "Just trying to find the printer." By the end of the week, people had stopped flinching when I walked by. They started asking questions, sharing ideas. The walls between departments began to melt. I called for open floor forums every Friday. No agenda, no slide decks, just a space where anyone, intern or partner, could say, "This isn't working," and not fear for their job. At the first forum, only 10 people showed up. Most just listened. One junior project manager cleared her throat and asked why we were still using outdated project tracking software. I asked her what she'd recommend instead. She blinked. I didn't think I was allowed to decide that. "You're not," I said, "but you are allowed to lead the search. Build a proposal. I'll back it." She smiled like she hadn't in months. 2 weeks later, the whole company was using her system. She was promoted the next quarter, not because she followed the rules, but because she changed them. That's the kind of place I want to build. Meanwhile, clients are watching. Some cautiously, some impatiently. One morning, Monica Ruiz, CEO of Nova Health, walked into our office unannounced. No entourage, no appointment, just her, standing in the lobby with a coffee in hand. "I wanted to see it," she said. "The new Vantage. The one that doesn't speak in buzzwords." I gave her a tour myself. We passed the creative pod, where teams had torn down their own cubicle walls. We stopped by the new collaboration room, where copywriters, analysts, and interns brainstormed like equals. She watched, nodded, smiled. At the end, she pulled me aside. "Jack, this doesn't feel like a company. It feels like a cause." That was the goal. In the weeks that followed, 3 legacy clients reinstated their contracts. Not because I begged, not because we slashed rates, but because they believed again. Not in branding, not in deliverables, but in us. Still, not everything was smooth. Change, real change, scares people. Some executives left quietly. A few tried to resist openly. One director sent an all-staff email mocking our new coffee circle feedback sessions. I called him into my office and asked one question. When's the last time someone gave you real feedback? He couldn't answer. He left by the end of the month. But others leaned in. Rachel from HR, once the woman clutching her iPad like a shield, began hosting Monday morning people hours. No scripts, no policy handbooks, just honest conversations. When she pitched a mentorship program that allowed employees to shadow across departments, I told her not to pitch it, just launch it. That same quarter, internal job transfers hit a new high. People stopped asking, "Can I?" and started saying, "I have an idea." Even the break room felt different. People lingered, laughed, collaborated over cold brew instead of complaining about deadlines. It didn't look like a revolution, but felt like one. And then came the note, printed and signed, taped to the inside of the elevator. This place finally breathes again. No one took it down. That afternoon, I found a mug on my desk with a quote from my first meeting back. "We're not here to impress. We're here to matter." I didn't order it. Someone printed it, glazed it, and left it quietly. I kept it, because that was the proof. We weren't performing. We were belonging. It started with a single email. Subject line, keynote invitation, the culture you rebuilt. At first, I thought it was a mistake. One of those mass outreach campaigns with my name mail-merged into the greeting. But when I clicked it open, I froze. The invitation was from a National Leadership Collective, an annual gathering of executives, educators, and cultural builders. People who usually invited best-selling authors and unicorn tech founders, not ex-partners who'd been quietly ousted and clawed their way back. But the email was real. They wanted me to headline the closing night. Not just speak. Close. The night. My first reaction wasn't pride. It was hesitation. I hadn't spoken publicly since the takeover. I hadn't shared what happened outside the walls of Vantage & Company. The new chapter was sacred because it was still forming. Exposing it, explaining it felt risky. What if I said too much? What if I said too little? But then I thought about Jenna, about the young project manager who redesigned our onboarding process from scratch, about the junior client associate who once told me she thought feedback was something you only got when you were already failing, about Monica Ruiz, who walked through her halls and said it felt like a cause, not a company. And I replied, yes, I'll do it. The night of the conference, I stood backstage in a hotel ballroom in San Diego, my palms cold, breath tight, watching the previous speaker wrap up her segment on AI-powered hiring systems. The applause was polite, calculated, not unkind, but empty. When they called my name, I didn't walk out with a PowerPoint. I didn't carry notes, just a chair. And the truth, I sat down, looked out at the hundreds of faces, and said, 2 years ago, I was told, politely, professionally, that I no longer fit into the company I helped build. They didn't say I failed. They said I was misaligned. That word haunted me. It made me feel like a broken gear in a machine that kept turning without me. The room was still, but I wasn't misaligned. I was deeply rooted. That was the problem. I was the part they couldn't replace with a slide deck or a LinkedIn post. And for a while, I thought being pushed out meant I didn't matter anymore, that I was finished, that my value had an expiration date. I paused. Eyes were locked in. What they didn't realize was that value isn't tied to position. It's tied to principle. And when you stand for something long enough, quietly, consistently, without compromise, it leaves a mark. I told them about the whisper texts from old clients, about the ones who didn't care what my title was, just that they could find me. I told them about the morning I walked into the boardroom and fired the man who replaced me. And then I told them what happened after. Not the glamorous parts, the messy ones, the awkward Friday forums, the uncomfortable departures, the fear that maybe I was rebuilding something that would eventually break me again. But here's what I learned. I said, voice low and steady. Culture doesn't change because a leader gives a speech. It changes when a leader chooses not to look away. I told them about the quote someone taped in the elevator. This place finally breathes again. And I told them how that one line meant more to me than any client win in 17 years. Leadership isn't how loudly you talk when you're in charge. It's how consistently you listen when you're not. When I finished, I stood, nodded once, and walked off the stage. No dramatic mic drop, just the sound of a room that had stopped breathing and just remembered how to exhale. Later that evening, A line formed outside the ballroom. Not because I was famous, not because I went viral, but because people recognized something in that story. A truth they'd felt but couldn't articulate. A part of them that had been bent by performance cultures, bruised by pretty mission statements with no muscle underneath. One young woman, early 30s, sharp glasses, trembling hands, stood last in line. When it was her turn, she didn't introduce herself. She just said, "Thank you for proving we don't have to burn out to be brave." And that's when I realized this wasn't a comeback story. It was a blueprint, not for how to rebuild a company, but how to rebuild trust in yourself, in your worth, in your voice, even after it's been buried. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can say isn't "I'm back." It's "I never left." You just stopped looking. The hotel room was quiet. Not the sterile kind of quiet that clings to lobbies and elevators. This was different. It was the silence that follows a storm. Not destruction, but relief. I'd spoken the truth. In front of strangers, in front of peers. I didn't dress it up. I didn't dilute it. And now it was just me, a glass of water, and a half-packed bag in a room that smelled faintly of citrus and laundry soap. I sat by the window, jacket still on, tie loosened, watching the city hum below. Taxis weaving. People heading somewhere that wasn't here. I was exhausted, not the kind that sleep fixes, the kind that only comes when a chapter truly ends. For years I had built. Then I was erased. Then I returned, not to reclaim the past, but to prove that value doesn't expire just because someone else fails to recognize it. But this wasn't about proving anything anymore. This was about closing the loop. The next morning, I flew home to Seattle. No fanfare, no welcome committee, just the clouds parting as the plane descended over the sound. Sunlight cutting through the gray in streaks like hope finding its way through disappointment. I stepped into my apartment. Same walls, same view, same silence. But it didn't feel hollow anymore. It felt earned. I set down my bag and wandered into the study. There on the shelf was a framed photo I hadn't looked at in years. 5 of us. The original Vantage team. Me, Elijah Carr, and 3 others back when we were renting co-working space by the hour and pretending we had a business. We were grinning, holding paper coffee cups, exhausted and naive. I stared at it for a long while. Not with bitterness. With gratitude. We built something from nothing. And yes, over time, it was diluted by ambition and acquisition and ego. But it started from something real. That mattered. I placed the photo on the center of the shelf. Not to memorialize the past. To honor the roots. Later that week, I returned to the office. Not to lead a meeting or finalize a pitch, but simply to be present. I took the long way through the halls, nodding at designers deep in collaboration, analysts scribbling on whiteboards, interns laughing quietly as they tried to fix a presentation before the 10 a.m. review. It felt alive. At one point, I stopped by the break room for coffee. A new hire, maybe 24, maybe 25, stood beside me. "Mr. Callahan?" she asked. I smiled. "Jack's fine." She hesitated. I just wanted to say, I joined because of what I heard, about how things changed here. And last Friday, I spoke at the open forum. First time I've ever spoken in front of a room without shaking. I nodded. "That takes courage." She smiled. It felt like it mattered. And just like that, it all made sense. That was the legacy, not the acquisition, not the conference stage, not even the clients who returned in waves. The legacy was that moment. One person, feeling safe enough to speak. After she left, I stood there for a long time, holding my coffee, looking out over the bullpen. We'd done it. Not perfectly, not quickly, but honestly. I returned to my desk, the one with the chipped corner and the mug that still said, "We're not here to impress. We're here to matter." I opened my laptop, not to answer emails, not to plan the next big thing, but to write a message. Internal, company-wide, subject line, "What comes next?" I want to thank each of you for your resilience, for your trust, and for the way you've shown up for each other. This company was never meant to be perfect. It was meant to be real. Real is messy. Real is hard. But it's also what lasts. In the coming months, we're going to keep building. Not because we're chasing numbers, but because we're rooted in something that doesn't flinch. We will protect that. Not with policies, but with people. Not with rules, but with respect. If you ever wonder where we're headed, just remember this. We're not going back. We're going deeper. Together. I hit send. Then I leaned back, exhaled, and let the hum of the office wrap around me. Not as noise, but as music. For the first time in years, I wasn't navigating politics. I wasn't proving my worth. I wasn't trying to be remembered. I was simply here. And that was enough. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I saw him again. I wasn't expecting it. I just wrapped a mentoring session with a group of junior team leads and decided to walk the long way back to my desk, past the riverfront cafe tucked between the office buildings and the footbridge. It was the kind of place Elijah always liked, quiet, unpretentious, with those little ceramic cups that cooled too fast and chairs that encouraged conversation over convenience. He was sitting by the window, alone, gray jacket, same watch, a hardcover book open, but clearly unread. He looked older, not in a withered way, but in the way that people do when they finally stop running from what they know to be true. He didn't see me at first, or maybe he did, and was waiting to see if I would look away. I didn't. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed, an ordinary sound that felt oddly final. He looked up slowly. There was no surprise in his expression, just stillness. "Jack," he said, with that familiar mix of gravel and theater. "I thought I might run into you eventually." I gestured to the seat across from him. "Mind if I join?" He nodded once, closing the book without marking the page. It didn't matter. He hadn't been reading it anyway. For a few moments, we just sat. No strategy, no armor. Two men who'd once built something that meant the world to them, and then watched it fall apart. Not in flames, but in silence. "How's retirement?" I asked. A corner of his mouth twitched. "Overrated. I thought vineyards and speeches would be enough. Turns out I missed the noise." "The noise or the meaning?" I asked. He paused. "Maybe both." I sipped my coffee. He traced the rim of his cup with a fingertip. "You did something remarkable," he said, finally. "You didn't just bring the company back. You made it better." "I didn't do it alone." "No," he said, "but you made it possible." I studied him. His face, his voice, his carefully chosen words. He was still proud, but now it was quiet pride. A kind he didn't need to parade. A kind that looked back more than it looked forward. "Elijah," I said carefully, "have you ever wondered if we could have avoided all of it? The break, the mess, the politics?" "All the time," he replied, eyes steady. "But I was tired and scared, and I let people I didn't even respect take the wheel, because it was easier than admitting I didn't know where we were going anymore." I nodded. That was the closest thing to an apology I would ever get. And it was enough. "You know," he added after a beat, "I still remember our first pitch. To that insurance startup in Redmond." I smirked. He chuckled. "Yeah, you were a suit 2 sizes too big," and I quoted Hemingway for no reason. "Courage is grace under pressure," I recited, grinning. "Still a damn good line," he said. The silence between us softened. Not awkward, just aged. Then he looked up, and for the first time in a long while I saw something vulnerable flicker across his face. "Do they still say my name in the building?" he asked. The question wasn't petty. It wasn't about ego. It was about legacy. "They do," I said honestly. "Not every day, but when they do, it's in the stories. The ones about how it all started, not how it ended." He exhaled, slowly, as if letting go of a weight he didn't realize he still carried. "That's all I could ask for," he said quietly. We finished our drinks without rushing. Outside, the wind had picked up. Autumn had begun to nibble at the edges of the city. People hurried by in coats and scarves, unaware that a piece of history was being quietly folded and put away at that corner table. As I stood to leave, Elijah reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a pen. It was old, heavy, brass, the one he used to sign our first incorporation papers. He held it out to me. "I don't need it anymore," he said, "but maybe you'll remember what it was for." I took it, not because I needed a relic, but because some stories deserve a bookmark, even if the chapter is done. As I walked back toward the office, pen in my hand, wind in my face, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because I'd won, but because I no longer needed to. The house was quiet when I got home. Not lonely, just settled. The kind of quiet that wraps around you after a long day, when even the walls seem to exhale. I hung my coat, placed my keys in the same ceramic bowl I'd used for years, and walked into the kitchen. The scent of something warm lingered, leftover soup, maybe, and beside the sink was a glass with half-melted ice. My son Drew was home. He was 14 now, taller every month, more questions than answers, and eyes that saw more than I liked to admit. I found him curled up on the couch, one leg tucked under the other, headphones around his neck, phone face down on the coffee table. "You're back early," he said, not looking up. I smiled. Didn't want to miss bedtime. He gave a small shrug. Didn't know he still did that. Fair. He was at that age, half man, half memory. The kind where they stop asking for bedtime stories, but still linger longer when you sit next to them. I poured myself a glass of water and sat on the other end of the couch. For a few minutes, we just watched the news, something about the markets, some tech acquisition. He didn't ask. I didn't explain. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Why didn't you just quit?" I looked at him. He didn't clarify. He didn't need to. He meant the company, the drama, the fight, the comeback, the speeches, the rebuild, all of it. "I mean," he added, eyes still fixed on the screen, "they pushed you out. You didn't have to go back. You could have just started something new, or walked away." I turned to him slowly, the weight of the question settling somewhere between pride and reflection. "I thought about it," I said honestly. "A lot. So why didn't you?" I leaned back, let the question breathe. "Because it wasn't just about me," I said quietly. "It was about what that place meant. Not the office, the people, the stories, the values. And if I walked away, all of that would have disappeared with me." He turned to face me now. "But they didn't deserve you," he said, voice sharper. "No," I nodded. "Some didn't, but some did. And they were the ones I went back for." He was silent for a moment. "And now," I said, "I stay because of who we've become, not because of what they did. I stay because I believe in what we're building." He nodded slowly. "You think I'll ever have a job like that someday?" he asked, almost embarrassed. "You mean one that breaks your heart?" I teased gently. He smiled. "I mean one that matters." I looked at him for a long time, then reached across the couch and tapped his chest. "It'll matter if you do it with this," I said. "Not just with your head, not just with your hands, but with your heart. That's what makes the hard stuff worth it." He didn't answer right away, just nodded again and turned back toward the TV. But I could see the question still working its way through him, like wet cement waiting to set. Before I went to bed, I found a small stack of papers on the kitchen island. Drew's school project, civics. One of the pages had a quote highlighted in marker. "Leadership is not about titles, positions, or flowcharts. It is about one life influencing another." John C. Maxwell. He'd written something next to it, in pencil. My dad taught me that, even if he doesn't know it. I stood there for a long time, longer than I meant to, and in that stillness, deeper than any applause, louder than any keynote, I understood something I hadn't been able to name until now. The comeback wasn't the victory. The company wasn't the legacy. He was. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday morning that smelled like early spring and fresh coffee, Drew stepped into the lobby of Vantage & Company. He was dressed in a crisp white shirt, one that didn't quite fit him yet, and carried a worn canvas backpack that still had a small sticker on the zipper from a middle school science project. He didn't say much in the car ride over, just kept glancing out the window, tapping his fingers on his jeans, humming whatever song was stuck in his head. "This is just a shadow day," he had reminded me earlier, as if I were the one who needed the reassurance. "I know," I said. "I'm not here because of you," he added, eyes firm. I smiled. "I hope not." We walked through the revolving doors together, but I let him step ahead at the security desk. He signed his own name, wrote Student Observer under purpose. I didn't speak for him, didn't stand behind him like a bodyguard. I just watched, quietly, as he took ownership of his presence. Natalie, our operations lead, came out to greet him. She was warm, but didn't overdo it. "Come on, Drew," she said, nodding. "Let's get you into the mix." He followed her down the corridor with the same mix of confidence and caution I'd seen in 100 young interns. But for him, it meant something different. He wasn't walking into a stranger's company. He was walking into mine, a place that had once tried to forget me, and now, unknowingly, welcomed the person who mattered most to me. I didn't trail him. I didn't need to. Instead, I went upstairs, sat at my desk, and opened my inbox, but found myself staring at the screen without reading a word. Because the truth was, this moment wasn't about business, or management, or culture. It was about witnessing. And so I did. From the glass wall outside the third-floor collaboration space, I saw him later that afternoon, sitting at a table with 3 junior strategists, listening closely as they explained a client brief. One of them passed him a marker and motioned toward the whiteboard. I watched as he hesitated for half a second, then stood up, walked over, and started sketching something. It wasn't genius. It wasn't groundbreaking, but it was brave. He contributed, not because he had to, because he wanted to. That evening, after we drove home in silence, broken only by radio static, I found a notebook on the passenger seat. He had left it by accident. I picked it up and flipped to the last page. At the top, written in block letters, was a single line. This place doesn't feel like a company. It feels like something alive. Below it, a rough sketch. A circle of dots, all connected by arrows pointing inward, not outward. At the center, he'd written one word: trust. I closed the notebook and sat there for a long time. Not because I was proud, though I was. Not because I was moved, though I was. But because, in that one simple diagram, he had drawn what it had taken me 20 years to learn and nearly lose. Real leadership doesn't radiate out. It draws people in. The following Monday, I came into the office a little earlier than usual. Before the noise, before the meetings. The morning sun filtered through the windows and scattered warm streaks across the hallway floors. I walked to the far end of the West Wing, the place where we now displayed snapshots of company history, etched in photo frames and short quotes. Not just the polished ones, not just the awards, but the moments that mattered. A sticky note from the first all-hands forum. We're not here to impress. We're here to matter. A photo of the day the walls came down between departments, people laughing with power drills in their hands. A printout of the internal memo titled, "What Comes Next?" And now, newly pinned to the board under Culture in Motion, I saw it. Drew's sketch. The same circle, the same arrows, the same word in the center: trust. No one had told me they posted it. No one asked for approval. Someone must have found his notebook. Someone must have felt it. That was the point. This place didn't belong to me anymore. And thank God for that, because it meant it was bigger than me. It meant it could outlive me. I didn't plan to step back. Not first. But something shifted after that day. After I saw Drew's sketch pinned to the culture wall, right beside quotes from visionaries and founders, something quiet settled into me. A clarity I hadn't expected. Not an urge to quit. Not burnout. Just a soft certainty that the torch had already left my hand. I'd just been too close to notice. It started with small things. Letting others lead meetings I once dominated. Stepping out of strategy huddles so younger voices could find their rhythm. Declining to attend panels or speaking engagements that once gave me a rush. I wasn't fading. I was making space. And the strange part? No one panicked. No one asked, "Where's Jack?" They kept building. They kept rising. They kept believing. One morning, Natalie, the same woman who'd walked Drew through his first day, knocked on my door. She didn't come with a question or a problem, just a moment of truth. "We've been having leadership roundtables," she said. "Cross-departmental. Unprompted. They started without me. Without you." I smiled. "Good. There's a rhythm now," she added. "One that doesn't skip when you're not in the room." I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the city. For the first time, I didn't feel responsible for the heartbeat of this place. I felt free. Later that week, I took an envelope from the top drawer of my desk, the kind you only use when something matters, and addressed it in neat handwriting. To Jack Callahan, age 30. I sealed the door to my office, turned off every notification, and began to write. Not a resignation, not a victory lap, but a letter. A message to the man I used to be. The one who once walked into this world hungry, stubborn, idealistic, and scared. Here's what it said. "Dear Jack, I know you're trying. You don't say it out loud, but I know the weight you carry. The pressure to prove yourself. The voice that whispers you're only as good as your last pitch, your last title, your last client who didn't leave. I know the nights you go home wondering if anyone saw how hard you fought just to stay in the room. I know the part of you that fears being invisible more than being wrong. Let me tell you something. You will be erased, and it won't be loud. It will be quiet. It will happen in calendar deletions and closed-door meetings and polite phrases like strategic shift. But listen carefully. That won't be your ending, because one day you will stop trying to stay, and you'll start learning how to let go. You'll realize that leadership isn't about clinging to the steering wheel. It's about building a vehicle that keeps moving even when you step off. You'll lose things, yes, but you will gain something better. Trust, humility, legacy that isn't carved in a plaque, but in how people treat each other when you're not watching. You will rebuild something that breathes, and you won't do it alone. You'll do it with baristas and interns and ex-rivals who become allies. You'll do it through awkward conversations and hard exits and silent mornings of doubt. You'll do it until one day, your own son walks through those doors, not as a favor, not as a shadow, but as proof. Proof that you weren't wasting your time. Proof that values, when lived fully, don't die with companies or job titles. They evolve. And if you're lucky, if you're really lucky, your voice will become unnecessary. Because the people who learned under you will teach others better than you ever did. That's when you'll know. You can go. Not because you've given up, but because you finally gave enough. Love, Jack. A little older, a little wiser, a lot more free. I folded the letter, sealed it, and placed it in the drawer, not to be read by anyone else, not for applause or closure, just as a marker, a moment. That afternoon, I walked through the office one more time, paused by the whiteboard where someone had scribbled, "Culture is what you allow to stay." I smiled. Then I stepped into the elevator, hit the ground floor button, and watched the numbers descend, not as someone stepping away, but as someone who finally understood. The greatest measure of success isn't what you build while you're here. It's what survives after you've stepped away. Years passed, as years do, not with fireworks, but with gentle, unnoticed erosion. The office kept humming. New names filled leadership decks. Logos changed. Taglines shifted. But the soul remained. Or maybe it evolved. Jack Callahan had stepped back. Not retired. Not disappeared. Just shifted out of focus. Like a spotlight deliberately dimmed to let another figure take the stage. He still came in sometimes. Not to manage. To listen. Sometimes he brought coffee for the front desk. Sometimes he sat in the back row during Friday forums, no longer moderating, just witnessing. And that was enough. One cloudy September morning, nearly a decade after the takeover, Jack received a message. Not through a corporate inbox or a formal request. Just a handwritten note slipped in the mailbox of his townhouse. No return address, just a faint wax seal and tight, deliberate cursive on thick paper. _ You spoke at the National Leadership Collective 10 years ago. I was 22, sitting in the far back. No title, no confidence, just a notebook and doubt. You didn't know it then, but your story saved me from quitting the industry before I ever began. This week, I was named CEO. I thought you should know. M. _ He read the note 3 times, then folded it carefully, placed it in the drawer beside the old brass pen from Elijah, and stared out his window at the river. 10 years. A name he didn't remember. A room he barely recalled. But a ripple that reached far beyond what he could see. That night, Jack sat alone at his kitchen table, a single lamp casting warm light over a mess of papers and memories. In front of him lay a scrapbook, not filled with press clippings or award announcements, but with fragments, scribbled notes from interns, a sticky note with "Thanks for seeing me," a photo of Drew standing in front of the Vantage mural on his first day as an official team member, years after his shadow visit. And just below that photo, an envelope never opened. He hadn't meant to leave it sealed this long. It was from Drew, written 5 years ago, handed to him on his birthday, with a quiet, "Don't read it yet. Read it when you're ready to stop." Jack never asked what he meant by stop. Stop leading? Stop hoping? Stop carrying the weight? But tonight felt like the right night. He opened the envelope. Inside, a single sheet of notebook paper, slightly crumpled, folded 3 times. "Dad, you always taught me that stories don't end when the last page is written. They end when the reader stops remembering them. I think I understand now why you stayed and why you left when you did. You didn't build a company. You built a compass. Not just for people inside that building, but for me, for who I'm still trying to become. Underscore if someday I forget what matters or why I chose the harder path, I'll come back to this letter. Just like I come back to you. Love underscore. D. Jack didn't cry. Not because he wasn't moved, but because peace doesn't demand tears. It simply arrives and sits beside you. He folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and tucked it into the back of the scrapbook. Then, with nothing to prove and no titles left to defend, he turned off the lamp and walked to bed. Months later, he sat in the very same auditorium where he had once delivered the keynote that changed his trajectory. But this time, he was in the third row, off to the side, half hidden by the angle of the lighting. No one noticed him slip in. The speaker was already on stage. A young man, early 30s, tall, calm, holding a clicker with steady hands and speaking into the mic with the kind of clarity that doesn't come from confidence, but from conviction. It was Drew, and Jack didn't need a program to know it. The room was full. The applause had quieted, and Drew said, "We talk a lot about innovation, about strategy, about visibility, but what we don't talk about enough is legacy. Not as a monument to ego, but as a quiet force of guidance, one you carry forward without asking who built it. When I first walked into the company my father rebuilt, I didn't understand the difference between power and permission. Now I do. Power forces people to follow. Permission gives them the courage to lead. My father didn't teach me how to take control. He taught me how to give it away." Jack didn't move, didn't blink, just sat there, a hand folded gently over his knee, letting every word wash over him like music written long ago and finally played by someone else. He wasn't the voice anymore. He was the echo, and he knew this at last was the ending. Not because something had stopped, but because something had arrived. The air outside the auditorium was cooler than he expected. There was a softness to it, the kind that only comes after a long night and a longer journey. The kind that says, "You've done enough." The kind that doesn't shout or clap or ask for your attention. It simply meets you at the door and walks beside you. Jack stepped out alone. The hallway behind him was still glowing from the event, but he didn't linger. No small talk, no photos, no one rushing up to shake his hand. Just his own footsteps echoing down the quiet concrete walk leading to the parking lot. He liked it that way. The sky was dark and clouded, but not stormy. The kind of night that felt unfinished, like it still had something to say. A light drizzle had begun to fall, almost invisible at first, then slowly collecting on the shoulders of his coat and the tops of his shoes. He didn't hurry, just adjusted his collar and kept walking. At the far edge of the lot, near the last row of cars, was a large promotional banner still fluttering slightly in the wind. It was Drew's face, smiling, poised, standing behind a podium with the caption, "Keynote Speaker, Drew Callahan, Strategic Director, Vantage & Company." Jack stopped in front of it, not to admire, not to gloat, but to pause. The image was bright and sharp. His son, mid-sentence, caught in the act of becoming someone larger than even he had realized. Jack didn't smile at the poster. He didn't need to. Instead, he looked up at the sky and let the rain gently settle on his skin. It reminded him of a day long ago, one he hadn't thought about in years. It was the first time he ever stepped into a real office. Not as a founder, not as a boss. Just a young man, fresh from a degree he wasn't sure would amount to anything. His shoes were too clean. His resume was too polished. His hands trembled slightly when he extended them to shake someone else's. He remembered the man who interviewed him, calm, focused, asked questions that weren't on the form. At the end of the interview, the man had said, "Don't chase the ladder. Build the floor under you strong enough that people want to stand on it." At the time, Jack had nodded without fully understanding. Tonight, all these years later, he finally did. Because the floor was still standing. People had walked on it, danced on it, built on it, and now someone else was reinforcing it from above. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small notebook, leather-bound, soft with age. Not his daily planner, not a business tool. His legacy book, a quiet journal where he scribbled things he didn't say out loud. Lessons, observations, regrets. Lines he wished he'd spoken in rooms he'd once dominated. He flipped to the last written page, and beneath the final line, "Real leaders are architects of silence, not noise." He began a new one. "He stood where I once did, and he didn't tremble." That's how I knew. I don't need a title to feel proud. I just need to remember that I left a door open wide enough for someone else to walk through. He closed the book, tucked it back in his coat, and looked once more at the banner. It would be taken down by morning, rolled up, stored, forgotten by most, but not by him. He walked to his car slowly, the rain steady now, soft and rhythmic like applause from the universe itself, subtle, sincere, and only meant for him. He opened the door, sat in the driver's seat, and took a breath that went deeper than lungs. No emails waited for him. No meetings in the morning. No fires to put out. He was, for the first time in decades, no longer responsible for anyone's future but his own. He turned the key. The engine hummed gently to life. And for a moment, just a moment, he sat there with the wipers clicking softly, looking through the windshield into the misty night. He didn't need to look back, because everything that mattered was already moving forward. The building was different now. The signage was sleeker, the lobby smelled of eucalyptus and new ambition, and the design studio had tripled in size. But the heart of it, the way people greeted each other, the way junior staff spoke up without fear, the handwritten sticky notes still tacked to the elevator wall, that hadn't changed. One afternoon, a new intern, a young woman named Elise, was walking the 4th floor when she noticed an old drawer built into the wall under the culture board. Most people passed by it. Some didn't know it opened. Some assumed it was empty. But Elise was curious. Inside, tucked between a few archival brochures and a faded copy of the original company values, was a weathered envelope. No name, just one line on the front in blocky, deliberate pen strokes. For the one who's still listening. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed slightly at the edges. No date, no signature, just words. Words that didn't sound like corporate vision or marketing fluff. They sounded like someone speaking quietly after the world had gone quiet. You don't need to change the world today. You don't even need to change the room. But if you can sit beside someone, listen when they speak, and remind them, gently, that they matter, you're already leading. Keep going. Elise stared at it, unmoving. She didn't know who wrote it. No one had mentioned it during orientation. It wasn't part of onboarding. But she folded it carefully, placed it in her notebook, and that evening, pinned a small copy of it to the culture wall, right below the words etched in glass. We're not here to impress. We're here to matter. Somewhere in a quiet house a few miles away, an older man sat on a back porch with his coffee, watching the sky fade into orange and gold. He didn't know that someone had just read his words. He didn't need to, because legacy doesn't knock. It echoes. And tonight, it had found its voice again. If this story moved something in you, don't just scroll. Leave a comment with the one line that stuck with you. Was it about leadership? Legacy? Letting go? We want to know what stayed with you and why. And if you're someone building quietly, leading without applause, this is your reminder. You're already making a difference. Subscribe for more stories that don't shout, they echo.